Good afternoon, everyone, and wish you a very warm welcome to this Design Thursdays webinar on shaping the future through interaction design. University of Petroleum UPES based out of Dehradun, and I'm a part of the School of Design. School of Design is one of the 8 colleges within the UPES, and I head the School of Design has specializations, product design, transportation design, fashion design, game design, and many others. And one of the most popular specializations is interaction design. So through these Design Thursdays, we are trying to sort of demystify to students what the whole specialization is about and what the career opportunities are, what the fine points are, what the industry looks for. And today we are joined by an industry expert, Jay Dutta. We are very, very privileged to in fact have him. He is the Senior VP Product Experience for MakeMyTrip. And he has a lot of roles at his belt. He's worked with some of the top organizations like Flipkart, Adobe, and he's also the founder of Design Up, a major tech and design festival. So we'll get to hear a lot about tech and design trends from him. And most importantly, right now for us in the COVID scenario, or the Aarogya Setu app, which most of us are actively looking at. So we're really looking forward to hear from him about careers, about his journey, about design. Welcome to you, JD. So would like to sort of kick this off with you talking about your journey.
Thank you so much for having me here, Manisha. It's wonderful to be here with the students, and thanks so much for getting together this afternoon. So yeah, what I'll do is, Manisha, I'll probably take the attendees through a very quick thing through my journey. So let me share my screen, and I'm sure you can all see this.
Yes, it's visible.
Great. So let me jump into it. I'm just, of course, I'll try and wrap it up in 13.5 minutes, but there is no guarantee. It's 3.5 decades, so it could go a little longer as well. That's me looking a little younger. I mean, of course, I was born in a city which had a design school, which had has still got the oldest design school. And the fact that I could draw, I mean, made my parents think that I could go to design school. And I actually met this bunch of design students when I was maybe that age. That student's name was MP Ranjan, and he gifted me a box of crayons. But around them, people would say, don't ever go to design school, all these designers become hippies. It turned out slightly different. So as it happens, that was a design school. At some point of time, I was thinking, should I do animation or a type design? So somehow, somewhere, I ended up doing type design, which is a great amalgamation of both design and tech, or you could say art and technology, kind of in many ways. Because at one point you deal with beauty, and the other point you deal with very sort of technical stuff like turning to sort of hinting and a whole bunch of things. After a few brief years in India, working kind of in branding, trying to set up a digital type foundry with this very famous designer called Sujata Keshavan Guha, ended up in the middle of nowhere. That is essentially this little dot that you see, which is an island called Mauritius. And most people would, when I used to travel there, people would say, so do you have a stopover anywhere? I mean, there is no way you can have a stopover anywhere on the way to Mauritius. That's probably the first stopover, even to the way to Reunion or Madagascar per se. I got interested in kind of web design because that was the in thing there, and we were not doing it. So in Mauritius, I was working with a few renowned brands in travel and tourism and all of that. These were like the who's who of the travel brands. But I kind of helped them get into the web kind of portals and things. And if you look at that, these things look very much from the print world. So I kind of was unhappy. I learned to code. I learned to look at code in different ways. And I met this website, which actually got a little mention, and a website of the day award for its navigation and all of that, which somehow got me a little bit of kind of prominence in the world of millions of designers kind of thing. The good part is that I started to apply to a lot of companies outside Mauritius, which was the whole wide world. And the people would ask me, so where is Mauritius again, kind of? And if I had applied from India, of course, people would have said, no, Indians don't do design like this. They do software, because Indians are supposed to do software only, kind of. That's what they do, kind of, right? So anyway, I landed up from a small island to a much bigger island. I landed up in the UK, working for a company called Circle.com. In the 2000s, .com was a big deal, and I think everyone wanted to be a .com. So .com boom, as you hear. I'm sure many of you would have heard it from your parents, kind of the .com boom thing. And thankfully, I got to travel. I was based in Bristol, but did work for people in Beijing and Cape Town and Manchester and onwards. And this is some of the early work. Of course, the boom didn't last, and the burst happened. I went back to college, but not doing purely design. I'll come to that in a moment. And interestingly, what had happened by then is that I started up my own studio in Manchester, pretty much right in the middle of the Old Trafford cricket ground and the Old Trafford football stadium, which are both walkable. But every time we had a football match, we had to close our offices and go home early because, lots of hooliganism also happens. So it was an interesting journey. And of course, so 2001 recession, I lost job, went back to school, did my master's in design management. Management was interesting for me because I just wanted to understand how the world works. And I think I'd seen it so far from the design perspective. I had a few years of experience. We want to understand how does finance and ops and strategy and total quality management and all of those, how do they all integrate with the world of design and influence design? Because I'd just seen one world economy go bust and kind of flatten out there. So it was great. I think I had a wonderful bunch of people, like a Japanese guy from Toyota to someone from ops management in Turkey. So essentially, these were all elective courses, and I would go to from people from other specializations, someone doing construction management, strategic management, all of that. So very, very interesting set of things here. 2008, as I said, I think, again, lost a business. 2020, if you ask me, it's the conference, because we're not having the conference this year. So it's a lost conference opportunity. But it was also a time for restart because, again, Sujata Keshavan Guha, who was my very first boss, she kind of had this, if you heard of John Scully and Steve Jobs moment, where Steve Jobs asked John Scully that, why are you selling sugared water? Kind of, she put that kind of thing out there saying, what are you doing out there in the UK? There are things which have already been designed and you're redesigning them. India is where the big opportunity is. Do you want to design airports? And I'd never thought about that. That was like a once in a lifetime opportunity. That was a restart. I came back from Bristol, from Manchester to Bangalore. And one of the biggest projects, my favorite projects I did, was the Bangalore airport. And this is inspired by so there are lots of theories around that, but it's purely inspired by the flowers that used to fall on my car windshield when I would go to office. And that's probably, for me, Bangalore was a city of flowers and trees and all. Sadly, I think it's decreasing a lot, but that's where it was. And that's, I think I had the privilege of also kind of working a bit with Delhi, a lot with Hyderabad. So I think every airport I've had the privilege of probably zipping across the runway before the flights could take off on some of these big red machines like these. It was great fun, but I think digital was calling. This was not so much digital work at all. And that's where Adobe happened. I think Adobe and I had been speaking for many years, even before I moved to India. And of course, it was a dream thing because Illustrator has always been my favorite. And to have your name come up on Illustrator like 5 years in a row was like, wow, I love that kind of thing. But also working with prosumers. These are people who are extremely fussy. People like you, if I change a little bit thing here to there, this is what you're using maybe a few hours every day. So you would be fussy about little changes as well. So we did some of these typical projects like Dreamweaver, InDesign, Illustrator, but some of the new experimental stuff, like what if I did something with the brand guidelines and thought of a brand system and so on. So we did that. This is a very good example done by a teammate of mine called Ranga, known for his illustrations, but we also did a lot of, you see 3 years, we've kind of changed the same panel across those 3 years. Of course, Adobe those days used to move slow and every big release would take a year. Now they move much, much faster, of course. And of course, imagining the same product in very, very different futuristic things. This was also the time of iPad. Actually, the year I joined Adobe, Steve Jobs, actually within a month, he had announced the iPad. So whereas most of Adobe stuff could not fit on an iPhone or any of the smartphones, iPad was a great way of maybe using some of our creative tools or even kind of collaborative tools. And this was one of them. Again, similar time, we sort of acquired Behance. So this project went into cold storage. After, of course, I started missing the excitement of the mobile, which everyone was talking about. And after almost 5.5 years in Adobe, I landed up at Flipkart. Flipkart was all mobile. As a matter of fact, at one point, they thought we will kill our website and go completely mobile. Thankfully, that never happened. Flipkart was a great experience, crazy, high acceleration, a lot of learning, but I think it was also a little bit of a culture clash in some ways. And I left to start my own company called ConfIQ. This was my startup, I think my second or third startup kind of thing. ConfIQ was a way for you or anyone or to see, it's like the TripAdvisor of conferences. What conference should I go to? That's what you used ConfIQ for. So the best part was I designed everything. I was the designer, the product manager, the finance guy, the guy going out there asking for funds, everything. And of course, I didn't get funds for some year. That year was a little difficult. And that was another failure added to my long list. So we had to shut out ConfIQ, but some of the VCs I've been talking to said, why don't you join us? Initially, I thought that might have been a trick question, but yeah, I ended up being a designer in a VC, which is, if you ask me, when we stepped out of an ID, we never knew what a VC was. And I think the VC concept itself was very, very new. And VCs were all extremely left-brained people. And here I was one right-brained guy in the middle of all these guys who could crunch numbers like crazy, kind of. I think it was a great journey, great to understand product market fit, to help other companies. So I worked with companies like Swiggy, Revigo, MakeMyTrip, so many small startups, very, very young founders, helping them understand how can product design, tech align. How do you actually find product market fit? So I think great experience. And at some point of time, the same VC called SAP Partners was also a big funder in MakeMyTrip. And when the merger between MakeMyTrip and Guai and Redbus happened, they said, why don't you move over? They will probably find a lot of usefulness out of design kind of thing. So there I was at MakeMyTrip. I think when I told a few friends I was joining MakeMyTrip, the first thing they said was, from the famous book, they quoted the line saying, surely you are joking, Mr. Dutta. I mean, MakeMyTrip just doesn't get design. And that probably was one part of it. But what was probably happening for a long time in the Indian industry was the fight probably was usually between MakeMyTrip, ClearTrip, and Yatra. At some point of time, this upstart came in called Guai, and they kind of changed the equations. It was just price wars which was happening. And when the merger happened, and clearly these two kind of, or these three companies came together, I think the CEOs in their wisdom felt this is a time to invest a lot more into design and product and tech and make sure that the experience is better. So far, we have been fighting the discounting war. Let's move on. So we moved on. This was an interesting kind of exercise in terms of thinking if MakeMyTrip were to change, why would it change and why should it change? So I think it was going back to the basics, going back to the philosophy of what should we do. And I think the clear thing for me which came was that personalization piece. Can we put that my back into MakeMyTrip? Can we make it personal? You've taken a lot of time searching for certain things. You come back tomorrow, you might have to start again. Can we actually help you not lose that context? So that's what happened with MakeMyTrip. Again, build the team. I mean, amazing team of people. As you can see, they have done some fabulous work out here in terms of good craftsmanship, as well as very user-centric perspectives as well. But I think a lot of it started with the culture. First, understanding the culture within which design fits in, and just adapting and adopting that to sort of bring design in. This is a system called Cosmos. Of course, the word Cosmos is inspired by one of my childhood heroes, Carl Sagan. But it's also a cosmos of so many things. It's just a huge library of elements which is there. We haven't talked so much about it, but I think it's a wonderful system. And the designers, just the other day, almost a month back, I called the designers who have been working on the Cosmos because they have done the version 3 now. And I'm like, I'm so proud of you guys and what you have achieved. I think it's an amazing journey that we have had. This is the V3, what you see on the right. We have gone on from being an app to being a super app in the travel category, and still maintaining the cleanliness and the overall order and structure to it kind of. And I think that's what probably makes me super proud of the team. And the Cosmos, of course, keeps growing. This one from Carl Sagan, of course, that Cosmos is ever will be or ever was kind of. So I think if I look at it, if I look back at my whatever 3.5 decades, and I'm going to add and show you a few more things, is that this probably has been something which struck in me. And as my teacher used to say, MP Ranjan, what are you going to, you hate something, what are you going to do about it? And this I found, not MP Ranjan's quote. This doesn't come from any guru's quote. It comes from an Honda advert from the 1980s. If you hate something, change something, make it better. That's the only thing that you can do. Take a positive spin on it. Second, of course, has been to fall in love with the problem, because that's what keeps you going. Strong opinions, loosely held, and the best arguments win, not the biggest titles. So I think these are the 4 things that I generally live by. But on the note of make something better, I used to crib sometimes about, like, you know, we need a bigger, better this conference. And somewhere Ranjan's words came into mind, what are you going to do about it? And that's how Design Up started. Design Up, of course, has, I'm sure some of you have heard of it and some of you might have attended it. It has become Southeast Asia's largest design in tech conference. This year, as I said, what did 2020 take away? I think definitely the Design Up conference. And we should have had over 2,000 people this year in November in Bangalore. But yeah, I think we will kind of, there are other more important things right now than the conference, and we are anyway learning and sharing. So let me just, so we also had a Singapore conference. We had a smaller event in Singapore, actually, some very interesting ones. Industry gurus like Alan Cooper, and a bunch of them have come to the conferences all across. We also have something called the Design Up Deconstruct. It's a report which we launched this year, but covering last year and this year, talking about the state of design in technology in India and Southeast Asia. And it's available for free for you to download. I'll share the link with you. We also have a printed copy, which is out here, in case anyone wants to buy for one. We will also be sort of inviting students who are interested in research to maybe join this year as interns. So I'll share the details with Manisha. We will have, 2020 is a terrible year and a great year that you should never miss out the research opportunity on that. So it's going to be a unique year in our lifetimes for sure, kind of. On that note, I'll probably go with the most recent project with Manisha mentioned as well. And this is coming back to COVID and the years will live by. I'm sure many of you have watched Lord of the Rings. This particular quote resonates a lot with me. I'm sure we all wish that none of this has happened, but given what we have, what can we do with the time we have? And I think interestingly, some of my colleagues saw this in early March, and these were engineers. And what you see here is a patient flow chart. This is someone in Kerala, one of the earliest people diagnosed with COVID. And what this is trying to do is to trace where all this person has gone through. So if you look at it, there's a fairly detailed one. The question the Kerala government is asking is, were you at any of these places at this time? If you were, please get yourself tested because you might have got infected. This is what contact tracing is. It essentially helps kind of identify if you were in close proximity, because the person is not maliciously kind of trying to spread disease. Even the person doesn't know. Maybe that result comes in a little later. So I think this is what contact tracing is doing kind of thing. And that's why Aarogya Setu idea was born. And Aarogya Setu happened in such a crazy span of time. Like we started in probably towards the middle of March. In a matter of days, I think we had a lockdown. We had to talk to the government. We suggested ideas. They had a bunch of ideas. We worked very, very closely with Niti Aayog, with the PMO, with MeitY, with so many government departments. And finally, this happened. I think it happened on April 2nd. I think from that initial ideation, and which is, again, I would say this is very tech-led, to actually getting it out in 8 languages in about little over 2 and under 3 weeks. I think that was a crazy timeline for sure. I think the good part was that it went, it kind of, people started accepting it. Obviously, will be questions on what kind of phones, etc. But also at that time, and even today, remember, it's a very urban population, which is the one who are getting it. People coming from abroad, people who have a few smartphones, if not one. So I think it was very important that if we could control those, we could control it spreading out to the countryside and to people who are far out, who may not have a smartphone. We did a whole set of these kind of things. And one interesting thing was adding friction to a lot of these. Because if you think about it, so far we have been making apps for, let's say, media consumption, playing games, whatever kind of fashion stuff. But this is a very different kind of an app, which neither our users have seen nor have we designed something like this before. And in some ways, we were adding friction because we wanted people to stop, think through, being truthful, because a lot of resources were going to go behind the scene. What is not seen is that there is a lot of physical infrastructure as well. There is a backend which is also there, which actually happens a lot for Aarogya Setu. These are some of the screens. This is the extended version, which you will see whether you can share the data, whether you can kill the app. We actually made sure that you could kill there are clear switches and buttons for that as well. It's become like the one on the left where you see in your area within the radius of, I think as of this week, maybe 22 million people come and look at this data every day. And in some ways, at a time when people think, oh, COVID is kind of gone, this probably gives them a reality check as well. So that's Aarogya Setu. This is probably a library we developed. Within a matter of the first 2 weeks, we actually launched 3 different versions because it kept changing, scaling. We realized this is not just enough, we need to do more. And then finally, by the end of 4 weeks, we had a definitive design structure. It's at a scale, and technically I'm not the designer. I think we have a wonderful set of 4 or 5 designers. I'm the guy in the middle talking to a lot of people, a lot of different specialists kind of thing. Because we have to move fast, I think you need to take all that input, convert it into something sensible, and convert that back into design, kind of, right? Some of the illustrations were done also by other companies. So they all pitched in. It was in a way a very interesting, nice way of doing it and contributing to the community. So that's in a nutshell, Aarogya Setu. I'm on most social media, or rather off it as JD all caps. I do send out a newsletter in case you want to check it out. It's a very random newsletter. Sometimes I won't, sometimes I will. You never know. And the free report which I was speaking about, you can download it from this link. Okay, so that probably, I'm not sure whether it covered the 13 minutes, but I think a little more than that for sure.
A little more than that, but it was incredible. Thank you so much, JD. This was really fantastic. There were so many names, so many visuals that not only me, but I'm sure everybody in the audience would be able to. And I must say that Make My Trip is my top most favorite travel website. I always go there to book my tickets. And yes, that logo of Bangalore Airport, it's etched in my mind. So all these things are, I think everybody in India would be able to relate to a lot of this, and also those images of Adobe worldwide, I guess. So it's phenomenal, and I feel very, very, proud of you to see how much you have achieved as a designer. It's really wonderful. So there are a couple of questions already from students. We just take a look at it, or from some of the audience. There is Hemant who's asking about what are the challenges faced by you to sort of, what in your journey of becoming an industry expert. So you've already talked about your journey, but anything specifically stands out as a challenge which other designers can learn from?
I think I'll talk about a few. So one is possibly being accepted. Not, I mean, of course, we will always try and work with our fellow designers, and we want to be part of the bigger design community and show what we have done. But I think very important that you should be accepted by the management of whichever larger organization or larger entity that you're working with. And that's a hard one because they don't speak your language. You speak a very different language. I think that whole thing in which how do you kind of communicate what you are, because it's not about the color, it's not about the font. They might not get it in the same way, but their objectives are very different. Their objectives are bottom lines, their objectives are profitability, their objectives are something else. How can design influence that? And can you actually bridge the gap and speak the language? I think that definitely helps a lot. You, people respect you for your skills, people respect you for the work that you do, but to be to sort of grow and spread the influence of design on a longer, bigger, scalable way, I think definitely that is one thing. The second is, of course, as I said, surviving through 2 recessions in the UK. Of course, the second time I kind of came back to India, but those are tough calls. Sometimes you lose jobs, definitely. When you lose a job in a foreign country, it's always even more difficult because your visa gets revoked kind of pretty early on, unless you can find something. So I think how to deal with such cases. And of course, there's frustration. You don't know what to do. You might have been, you're not sure what the future looks like. So how do you deal with it? And the third is, of course, risks. How much of risk are you willing to take? I think I kind of have realized looking back that I have a fairly high appetite for risk. So I keep taking a lot of that, but of course that I think is important because that I think you need to fail, and you need to fail to learn a lot about. If you can fail and learn, I think that's the biggest thing that can actually propel you to do something more.
That's a phenomenal and very, very important point. I think the freedom to fail should be there. And as a design institute, we want to build that because that's the way you grow as a designer. But for anyone, if you have to do innovation, you have to fail. So I really love that point. So there's another question from Diksha out here who wants to know, how did you first think of being a designer? I mean, how did it strike you?
I think I wanted to be an architect, and the fact is that I was in Ahmedabad surrounded by a lot of NIDians or NID students who, one way or the other, people would know. So I think it probably didn't strike me that I wanted to be a designer. I wanted to be an architect. But sometime in my school trip, and probably when I was in 11th or 12th, I think the school trip took me to NIT, and I was like, wow. I mean, I had been to NIT before as well, but may not have been such sharper memories of that. And somewhere it became like a very strong option for me. I guess I didn't know what I would study in NIT if I were to get through, and I had no idea, kind of. But I like the fact that somehow people were doing, they were like me, they were doing the kind of things I like doing. And so maybe I'll make something out of it. That was probably a gut feel. Very importantly, I think parents supported me through that, saying, okay, fine, take a, let's see what happens, kind of.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, I think design is a profession where sometimes parents are with you and sometimes parents are not. But it's growing, and there are so many opportunities today for design. Where maybe in some of the other domains they're not so much anymore. But the design is really happening.
True, and parents are getting more. I mean, I think parents of today, I mean, way more sensitive and understanding than our parents. I guess, kind of.
Yeah,
I mean, like,
absolutely.
there, you know.
Yeah, so there's another interesting question here from Divyansh. So why are there no Indian virtual meeting apps?
There is one which is there in progress, but Divyansh, that probably is a great opportunity. So maybe it's time for you to ask and figure out if anyone is making jump in, be part of that bandwagon. I think every time that you see a white space, I think that's a great opportunity. But eventually, it doesn't matter whether it's an Indian or not. Kind of. I mean, yeah, lovely to have something from India. But either way, think about it. A lot of these might be eventually controlled by Indian CEOs anyway, kind of, whether it's in the valley or not. So.
True, absolutely. And there's a larger question out here. What is the scope of UX in the current scenario? I would say maybe if I can expand this question, how has UX evolved over the years, and what is the current scenario? If you take the historical and the current perspective.
Right. I think when I was talking about my journey, I think that was an interesting perspective. I mean, I started when UX was not a term at all. It didn't exist, kind of. It was web design and web designers and web art directors, all sorts of such things. Actually, we looked up to my interaction design and doing a bunch of things, which was very, very new, very, very path breaking kind of thing. So I think the word interaction has been around, the word information architecture, those have been around. Somewhere it became from being brochureware websites, training, teaching, tutoring, a lot of that, to suddenly becoming a part of transaction. I think banking, mobiles, all those kind of brought in the whole thing that actually it can be a transactional website. You can actually buy insurance online. You can actually deposit money. Today, what we take for granted, I think that was probably a big turning point, that I could actually trust it, and money can go from point A to point B safely and without a physical view of money, for instance. And I think that was probably the 2000s when the turning point happened, and a whole other set of things followed, which were very transactional, not just brochureware, not just learning, but actual transactions. I could buy things, things can be delivered. So I think that is when the term started to happen. And if you look at it, people like Adobe kind of moved from being purely print to being print plus digital to being purely digital. So I think that's at some point of time, it started to become a part of our daily lives. The smartphone, of course, changed all of that, because we're now carrying a computer in our pockets and we're using it so many times. I think the number of unlocks is something like a few hundred times a day. Now suddenly you play games, you watch TV, you watch, consume news, everything kind of, right? So it's, I think that the famous quote by Benedict Evans that mobile is eating the world. In a sense, mobile ate the camera is inside the mobile. So editing is inside the mobile. So I think that's what has happened. That's what changed. There's also the saying that with every sensor in the mobile phone, a whole new industry comes up. And so I think that's the effect of it. Obviously, it has come at the expense of something else. So for example, maybe print has gone down, branding has gone down. So when I started my career and life in the branding world, but now the branding is the experience. So you you're probably looking for Uber logo or the MakeMyTrip logo to launch the app. But once the app is launched, your brand is your experience. So that's what has transformed. So if we were to craft the logo earlier, now it doesn't matter. It's one of the many touch points, whether it's the kind of the ticket you buy, the way it comes to you, so on. So I think that's probably what has happened. And I think it's going to grow more and more. If you think of healthcare, interestingly, education coming back in a full circle again, I think, which is like a lot of what we are doing. I think there will be a lot more softwares coming in, which I think the Vyansh also asked. But right now we are kind of repurposing maybe Teams and Zoom and all of that. But tomorrow, educational software for live teaching. So maybe that would be a very different thing, a class interaction in a better way. There are lots of opportunities here. I think the scope is just going to go bigger and crazier and much more touch points everywhere, kind of.
Thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive and excellent answer. So there is a question here which I feel should have been answered by everything that you said. Here is saying, I heard that UX designers' work is not to do design, but tell the experience. How is it? Is it true or not? Does a UX designer do design at all? Is the question.
Interesting question.
I face this question quite often because I've also been in interaction design for a long time.
Right. Yeah. No, I think if design is, if we call it a rendering of an intent, then you are a designer, right? Sometimes a designer, interaction designer is doing flows and not really a physical thing. The one I was mentioning to Manisha earlier was buttons, behaviors, and bottom lines. So you are also designing the button, but with that button is changing the way you behave with it. So you are actually a behavior designer in some ways. You are changing maybe the bottom line or the balance sheet of the company. If you just think about that like button, if just Facebook's like button, right? Think of the impact over the last few decades, kind of whatever, a decade kind of thing, right? It's massive. I think part of it is millions of people using it, getting glued to it. So someone must have thought about the button and said that that button would actually be a great reason why X, Y, Z, because there's a way of social interaction, blah, actually physical. Why should we be doing this? Is it essential? Is it important? Can something else be done, etc. So I think that's the best way of starting anything. Start with the why. Kind of why are we doing this? That's pretty much the case. In terms of strategy, I think when you answer the why, I mean that's probably answers part of your user psychology or user need. You're doing it. Obviously, you're doing it because finally somewhere there will be some engagement which might lead to more money for the company you're doing, or so on and so forth. Sometimes it might just be engagement, let's say in a classroom, engagement with an app, maybe buying of a ticket, etc. But the fact is that beyond that, the question that you need to ask is, why is it important for the user? Why is it important to do this at this point in time? And I think that pretty much is there's this very famous philosophy which is used a lot in management as well, called the 5 whys. You have to keep asking why, and you say the answer is X, and you say, but why X? You say why, and so why that? So I think you keep digging deeper and deeper into the root cause, and that's when you understand why are we actually doing this. Aarogya Setu was a great example because a lot of the user psychology was unknown. Because users had never used an app like that. So we would have to keep going back and understanding how are they using it? What are the sort of difficulties they have? What is their perception? The other thing is that their perception might be something, but do you actually want to? So most users feel that the Aarogya Setu should start beeping the moment I'm close to a COVID-19 patient. But that's not the way. That kind of violates privacy, right? But see, I think this is the interesting part, that everyone wants their own privacy preserved, but everyone wants the sort of the other's privacy is okay to sort of be compromised in some ways, which is wrong, kind of, right? So I think you can never do an app like that. So sometimes users will want something to behave in an X way, but you cannot, because that's not the right thing to do. So I think that's when understanding all this will help you with the bigger picture. It's a big question, and I think it's a slightly woolly answer, but I hope it answers that.
No, I'm sure it did. It was not a woolly answer. It was a very good and comprehensive answer. So coming to the next question, this is maybe you partly answered it, but it's an important one. What were the challenges you faced while designing the Aarogya Setu app?
I think challenges were, of course, we were designing in very uncertain times. So one, there was no brief. There was no clear client. Of course, the client is Government of India, or you're working with the Government of India. Government of India is not a client. Government of India is actually the someone who's sponsoring it, who's actually kind of, but the moment you say government, there are, I mean, one is that you can understand from outside it's a government, but the moment you're inside, there are so many people. There's ICMR, there are specialists, there are people from IITs, there are epidemiologists, there are bureaucrats, there are different departments from the PMO to Niti Aayog, and very qualified people. So very different, they are people, right? And I think we are all dealing with a very uncertain situation and trying, and this is not a silver bullet. This is one of the many things that you can do. So what best can you do given all the constraints that you have, time being a huge constraint, because you need to get out fast, not to the market, but to the people, kind of, right? So I think those were some of the challenges, the newness of the app itself, because why should we use X technology or Y technology, or what should we exclude, what should we include? Once data starts to come in, then you begin to understand how people are using it. A lot of it was in the lockdown. So if I were to kind of put it in a clearer way, I would say there is process part of it, which is how do I kind of get it out there fast, and in the most effective way for users. There is a people part. I work with people who I've never met, because we all met on Zoom. The lockdown had happened by then, right? You don't know how they work. You don't know what's the rhythm, all of that. So how do you work with those people? And you have to make decisions fast. The third was that you need to release every day, because you need to get the next app release done the next day. There might have been an error, there might have been an issue, there might have been something interesting you found which you want to create and do out there. To do 3 revisions within like matter of 2 weeks is in the live environment in 8 languages. I think it was crazy, probably. Right? And while every day, I think at some point of time, there were some 4,000 people downloading the app a minute. Then at some point there are 15,000, at some point there are 25,000 people downloading an app a minute. So your errors get magnified. So you have to be very careful in what you do. And very often we would not do certain things because we felt, I mean, it's too risky. Will people get it? Specialists like epidemiologists or academics, when they talk about certain algorithms or constructs, it takes us some time to understand this is what they mean, that if you are within the radius, etc., will people get it? So we would very often think about the guy in Bombay or Bihar, a village in Bihar, or somewhere in Tamil Nadu. Will they actually get what we are trying to say, or is it too highfalutin kind of stuff? So I think those were the challenges that we dealt with. Within a month, it stabilized. In 13 days, we anyway crossed the 50 million kind of number. So obviously, we had to be very, very sure, and it made Pokemon to become the world's #1 downloaded app, fastest downloaded to 50 million. But those numbers aside, I think the interesting part has been, of course, the impact which the government has talked about as well. How can you predict hotspots? How can you kind of make sure that people are doing the right thing, they are being taken care of, etc. So there's a huge machinery behind. So in that sense, it gets from interaction design to service design. So a lot of that was also involved. So massive learning. first 1 month was, first 6 weeks was like being on a crazy rocket ship kind of.
Wow. So a lot of our students, say that they don't have enough time to finish a project. They've only got like 4 months to finish their final kind of thesis project, etc. They're always running out of time. So this should be inspirational for them that an app with this level of national impact was delivered in, I guess, a few weeks. And it's been hardly any time, but the number of people who are using it and actively looking at it on a, I wouldn't say even daily, it's like a hourly basis is incredibly huge. And kudos to you for this, and you and your entire team. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, wonderful team kind of which pulled it through like crazy kind of thing. And actually we had a lot of these routines where people would, while we were designing, people were sleeping and the engineers would wake up when we had finished the design, because this was like all night. Then there were of course translators and, government folks. The government of Assam kind of said, we are going to help you with translations, because we didn't have translators, for example. We had freelance translators who helped us. There were people who lent us the voice to say, okay, how do you explain this thing? So I think what was wonderful was to see the generosity of people who came together. Whether they believed in this government or not, it doesn't matter, because we're doing it for the country and for its people. I think that was a beautiful part of everyone coming together. Kind of.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now there is a question, can new heuristics be developed by designers after going through the changing user psyche?
Of course, I think if you think about heuristics, it's nothing but what's called the rule of the thumb. And rule of thumb essentially comes from art, where you actually kind of use thumb to measure. Like if I were to draw someone's portrait, so this maybe the forehead is like half a thumb, and you kind of use that. It's a rule of thumb. You are essentially defining kind of broader structures within which you are trying to fit something in. It might fit in. If it doesn't, you develop new ones. So yeah, absolutely. The heuristics are always up for kind of, what should I say, for innovation and change kind of thing. And also a lot of technology is changing. So with that technology changing, I think, so for example, for me, I think the big one, the next big tech change will be voice. Now, and again, going back to that other question is that, so like are the designers, people are designing for voice. But I think that's going to be another very interesting shift that we'll see, where we are no longer pressing buttons and all of that, but we are actually doing voice commands. So yeah, I think that would have a whole new set of heuristics kind of, right? So I think it will keep changing. And this is the beauty of our field. It keeps evolving. If you are willing to learn and be curious, I think this is a great field to be in.
Right. And a related question, where do you see the future of design and technology going? Where do you see the future? Of course, there is also COVID and the impact, but regardless, where do you see the future of design?
I think the future of design and tech is, of course, going to be way more personalization. Already a lot of it is happening, but a lot of it is still very silly kind of personalized ads that you keep seeing, and then you say, I don't like this ad, or remove this ad, or this is offensive, and etc. etc. I think we are just scratching the surface when it comes to personalization kind of thing. It's almost like having a personal assistant. So a couple of examples I could give in healthcare, for instance, and this is not new, but I think it just needs to be consumerized more. Elderly people staying alone, for instance, just by motion and movement, you can figure out if they're okay, having a good day, just by, of course, a lot of it is going to be intrusive, unfortunately, but a lot of it is, actually going to be also something which will help people. So, for example, did you take your medicines on time? Did you actually get up on time? Or are you still in bed, but you should not be? I think there's a whole bunch of things. Of course, this can lead to funny situations as well. The other one would be a personalization in terms of like almost having a Jeeves at your call. So instead of maybe kind of tomorrow, you might not need to use a interface for a MakeMyTrip to book your tickets, but it could just be a conversation. And I know already a lot of work is being done by Amazon, Alexa, and all these kinds of things, and Google Home and everyone. I think what you're seeing today is very, very nascent, very early kind of thing. Tomorrow it will probably be the way it's learning. I think if you just think about the way it's learning, I think is going at a super fast learning speed. The change which I definitely see coming is that just like happened with the smartphones to the feature phones to the smartphones, the day kind of Steve Jobs pulls up his iPhone and says, this is the new world and this is going to change. And in a few years, you saw everything change, kind of, right? Suddenly people who used to kind of think that without buttons, they can't do anything, they suddenly started using those very flexible keyboards. The keyboards can become a kind of GIF keyboard or I think a lot of the students out here don't even think about that. But a few generations ago, I think that was a big change. I mean, going from a physical keyboard to a digital keyboard, which is morphing kind of, right? Now, the similar big jump will happen, I think, the day you go from a screen to a voice. And I think this film called Her is probably a great example of that. It feels like suddenly technology is like not there. It's not visible technology, but more invisible technology. So I think, yeah, the future of design may not be buttons. It may be more behaviors and voice kind of thing, motion, voice. And I think we need to think in those holistic way. And that's why I think for designers, it's very important because I think our tools will not be so much necessarily a Photoshop or a sketch or a Figma, but it might be empathy and writing and reading. So I think those might be even more important as we go ahead.
So much. It seems like a very exciting future, whatever it is, and definitely an exciting future for designers. So as we're sort of coming towards the end of this wonderful interaction, there are a few questions from students who want to know your words of advice to them. Some of them are UX designers, some of them are aspiring designers, but what would you say they should keep in mind as they prepare to be designers and prepare for a career in the industry?
I think, of course, you will learn your tools and you will learn the what's and the how's, but never lose sight of the whys. I think that's very important. Why am I doing this? The other thing is also, I think there's no substitute for hard work. I think that just goes without saying. Just like many of you play games, and I think to reach the next level, you need to kind of keep playing and master those. It's a bit like that. You need to keep mastering those. So you will master tools, you'll master technology, you will master a whole bunch of things. But I think two very important things are why. The second, of course, is curiosity. I think that is very, very important increasingly. And I think I strongly believe in being able to connect dots. How can you connect dots between business and design, psychology? And I think if you think of design, design is a profession right in the middle of so many things. At one end, you have specialists, let's say engineers or epidemiologists or marketing folks or someone, and then you have maybe to use a generalization, the common man. You're interpreting certain things for X for Y. So you will need to understand, you will need to be very curious, open-minded, connect the dots, read a lot more, not just about design. And I think this is another thing that I'll probably warn you. It's very easy to fall into the trap of being in designer groups and designer conferences and designer WhatsApp messages and designer whatever kind of thing. But I think what is outside of design is very important. And I think you need to fold that increasingly into, there's a huge world outside Dribble and Behance and Pinterest and all of that. And I think you need to read and imbibe a lot of that. That probably would be my bigger thing as such.
I think that beautifully answers some of the other questions that are there of how do you think one can keep learning from different sources around us, as you've already talked about those. So that's really wonderful to know. And yes, there are a lot of questions related to careers in UI, what's the difference between UI and UX, and those sort of questions. But I have a feeling you've answered most of it. But if you want to talk a little bit about this too.
I think you mentioned one on COVID and the situation and all of that, right? Which I don't think I answered. So I could take a very quick pass at that first, and I'll probably say this too shall pass. The question is when, we don't know. I've lived through enough recessions to tell you that this too shall pass. Some last longer, and I think India in some ways is much more resilient, and partly because of such a grey economy we have. But I think those guys need to be protected, like your sabziwalas and all of that. So you don't just have an institutional economy, you also have an informal economy. You also have this grey economy, which is not very clear. But I think we will bounce back. I've always felt, living in the Western world, that India bounces back faster. And it's thanks to the resilience of its people, you, me, and a whole bunch of things. And I'll quote the wizard, the grey wizard Gandalf again here. So Gandalf was asked, why Frodo, why the little guy, kind of thing. And Gandalf says, it's not the big things, it's the small things which actually make the difference. And that small guy gives me hope and courage. And I think it's something like that. It's the small things that we need to take care of. And I think just take care of yourself and your surroundings and your family, and kind of, it should pass.
That's wonderful words of advice, and thank you so much. And I truly believe, yes, the devil is in the details. So I think, I hope the connection is good. It's breaking in some parts. I hope you're able to hear, but I'd like to wrap up the session now, because I'm just conscious of your time. I know how busy you are, because it was so difficult to catch you. I know that you've really taken out time, and we're very grateful for the time that you've taken out for our students and for our aspiring students. I'm sure that they've learned a lot from your words of wisdom. And from here, I would love to invite you to Dehradun sometime, to our campus, and to interact with our students, maybe take some sessions for them. We'll learn a lot from you. Thank you so much, JD.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. I think I really enjoyed.
Take care and be safe. And thank you to all the audience too for being here.
Thank you to the audience, and great questions. I think a lot of it. So really appreciate the interaction.
Absolutely. Wonderful questions and wonderful interaction with you, JD. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Manisha. Thank you. Bye-bye.